Yes, Otis, what is it?
Sir, this is an emergency. Sir, there are errors in the video. There is new information. We must issue a new video.
Otis, I know, I'm working on it. I mean, these are videos about current affairs. There's limited information. There's always the risk of doing something wrong, okay?
No, it is because you don't consult with me, sir.
Intro. In my previous video about the Oreshnik, there were two errors. The first is this video. This is not a video of the Oreshnik being launched. It is a video of a Soyuz cargo that was launched a couple of hours after the attack with supplies for the International Space Station. I just trusted the source. It turned out to be wrong. The second error is that the estimates of the energy released by a Mark 84 and a kinetic impactor are off. And the comparison doesn't seem as impressive as I say in the previous video. Part of it was a calculation mistake. Part of it was a wrong estimate. I'm not giving you any new numbers, to be honest, because I am going to dedicate a video to this topic of the kinetic impactors, done right, not in a rush like these videos that are actually covering the current events, trying to be correct and thorough in all the calculations. So apologies for the mistakes, but with these out of the way, there are new pieces of information and there are some interesting points that came out from your comments. The video got a lot of views and a lot of interesting comments, so I think it's worth discussing them. Ukrainians have shown some debris, or at least it's what they are claiming, because, for example, this component, which looks like something that could be part of the fuel system, seems too big and too fragile to have survived the impacts. Could be part of the buses. Maybe every vehicle that is released by the main missile has its own bus that then releases the submunitions, and then the bus re-enters the atmosphere more slowly, decelerating way more than the warheads, because obviously the bus should be regular in shape and have a very poor ballistic coefficient, and some debris actually landed inside the perimeter of the factory, and so some elements survived. To be honest, considering that the Yuzhmash was a factory where missiles have been built, they may just have had some components laying around that were smashed in the attack, and so that's what they're showing. There would be disinformation, but I don't fault Ukrainian a bit. It's what you do during a war. The other interesting element is that we have one satellite picture of the Yuzhmash after the attack, or so it seems, but the damage that we see, it's really, really odd. So you would expect that the warhead punches through the roof and hits whatever is below. Now we see that all the impacts are lined in two lines 90 degrees from each other. If this is real damage, it means that the accuracy is incredible, because it really seems that the trailing warheads went through the holes punched by the leading warheads. That is laser guidance level precision. I really don't see how this could be, honestly. What I was expecting was a cluster of impacts, roughly circular or oblated, centered somewhere on the factory, maybe with a diameter of a few hundred meters. From the videos, you see that pretty much each wave falls very close to the other one. There is one that is slightly off and one that is probably a bit larger than the others. And by the way, we don't see any damage from this wave that went off on the side, which is strange in itself. So I don't want to say that the pictures that we have went through the Photoshop treatment, but it's definitely odd. I really don't know what to think. The first witnesses that were unverifiable, to be honest, said that the entire factory was destroyed, that only dust remained, which honestly seemed to exaggerate. What we see from the satellite images is not really credible as well. I suspend the judgment on this. Anyway, from the Ukrainians, we have two other interesting points. The first is that among the debris, they have found components that could be traced to the Bulava and components that could be traced to the Yars. So the actual lineage of this weapon is still unclear. And honestly, it could well be mixed. The second point is that the Ukrainians believe that the impact was not Mach 10, was between Mach 11 and Mach 11.4, so even faster than we thought. And as we already said, a kinetic impactor at that speed does a lot of damage. And by the way, nothing forbids to add some explosive payload inside the warheads. So we will see, but now coming to your comments and your questions. Watching the previous video, some people complained that the sound of the impacts didn't seem real. In fact, it wasn't real. I actually added it just for dramatization, but I admit it's not real. There is a video that has some form of the audio of the impacts, but it's terrible qualities. Some others said, well, if the Russians have it, for sure the United States already have it and is going to be 5 times more effective. Guys, if you're happy to believe that, feel free. I don't think it is the case, because we would have had at least some fragments of information, some pictures, anything. I mean, missile launches don't go undetected, but the key point is that a weapon like this is not aligned with the American military doctrine. But some others said, well, if the United States doesn't have it, they will surely be capable of having it if they just want it. And well, about this, I honestly agree. Honestly, I think that even Ariane Space, for example, the French would be able to build this if they were tasked to do so. It's probably a weapon within the reach of the Chinese, the Indians, the Iranians. I mean, it's not such an advanced technology. I don't believe it is that difficult, even though I don't want to banalize, obviously, this kind of systems or this kind of achievements. At the end of the day, is a scaled-up variant of a technology that already exists, that have been around for at least 4 decades, let's say even 5. So that's not the point. The point is that the Russians built it and they're going to produce it serially, and it's going to become part of their military doctrine, while the others haven't. Another comment that was quite common was, wow, 36 warheads, just imagine if it was nuclear. No, if all those 36 warheads were nuclear, it would be much different. In fact, with such a compact salvo, the first warhead that goes off, maybe just a couple of milliseconds before the others, is going to take out all the others. So rather than having 36 nuclear detonations in the same place, you will have one. If you want to attack a target with multiple warheads, with multiple nuclear warheads, what you do is actually aiming the warheads around the target. So in the middle, the heat wave and the shock wave, they sum up, and the destructive effect is much higher. Some others have commented that inside each wave of 6, there is going to be just 1 nuclear warhead, and the other 5 are actually decoys. In this attack, there was no nuclear warhead, but otherwise it will be just a ballistic missile with 6 nuclear warheads. No, I don't think so, because all these warheads came all through at the same speed, very close to each other, with minimum staggering between each other, so they seem 6 identical devices. I personally believe, as I have already explained, that this is a weapon for conventional deterrence. This is an area saturation weapon that can attack large area targets like a factory, a port, a railway node, rather than, crucially, an airfield. And since it carries 36 warheads, which I believe it's honestly unprecedented, I can't recall any other ballistic missile with that many warheads, you don't need that many of them to attack the target. If you want to attack an airbase, for example, you will probably need 5 or 6 of these weapons. The first one will deplete the interceptors that you can reasonably place around the airbase to defend it, and the other missiles will do the actual damage. The scenario that I have in mind is a few hundred of these missiles launched, for example, against the main air bases of NATO air forces in Europe, which could, in a single strike, severely damage most of them, reducing the capability of NATO air forces. Now, this is extremely important because the NATO air forces are the main components of Western military power, of NATO military power. In NATO doctrine, if you don't have air superiority, you basically don't do nothing. If you severely reduce the capability of generating missions, of supporting the aircraft in any way, shape or form, then you have removed a large chunk of the military capability of NATO. This is something that you could conceivably do with a weapon like this. With weapons of previous generation, of existing generations, you can't. Well, unless you go nuclear, which is something that the Russians like to discuss quite a lot. But, to be fair, in Russian military thinking since the 80s, the discussion on how to achieve conventional deterrence without nuclear weapons has been a point of discussion. So we have seen this weapon now, but probably the concept and the idea is very, very old. And it goes back to the 80s and 90s. Some others have commented, well, all this is well and good, but if you want to achieve this kind of capability, actually using a ballistic missile is a very expensive and resource-intensive way of achieving it. Yes, surely not cheap, it's surely resource-intensive, but consider the alternative. What would the NATO do to execute the same mission? An attack on an airbase, on a large airbase to neutralize it? Well, it will probably set up a large attack package, maybe 20 to 40 combat aircraft, plus tankers, AWACS, all kinds of support assets that will execute a time-on-target attack, penetrating the Russian air defenses using standoff weapons, precision weapons, and so on. Well, all of this has a cost. Penetrating the Russian air defenses is not that easy, but they are a pretty tough nut to crack. NATO has the capability of doing so, but it's not easy at all. So in case of an in-depth attack on an airbase, you are likely to have losses. And all these sophisticated weapons that you will be using are not cheap as well. And the logistic tail, the training, the industrial base, the maintenance that is behind this capability of deploying power is literally immense. If you compare this with the ballistic missile, maybe the ballistic missile is winning. Sure, an air force is much more versatile, no doubt about that. But the Russians, whose air force is, well, pretty good, but surely doesn't have this capability to execute this kind of very deep and complex missions, or at least has a minimal, small capability of doing so. It's not the core of their doctrine. They focus on air defense, they focus on battlefield interdiction and close air support. They don't focus on this kind of or deep strike into enemy territory. The Russians didn't have this capability. With a weapon like this, they could potentially acquire it. And it is perfectly in line with what they normally try to do. Reply asymmetrically. Don't fight in the same way your opponent is. Try to outsmart your opponent doing something different that they are not prepared to contrast. And this is the reason why I believe that a weapon like this may really be a game changer. I mean, the previous video was dramatizing a bit, but I honestly believe that this is a very, very interesting development that may bring some very interesting change. Anyway, this is surely not the end of it. We will keep an eye on this and we will see how it develops. And meanwhile, thank you very much for getting this far into the video, and an enormous thank you to all those who are supporting the channel on Patreon or by being a member or by any other of the available means. And today there is also a GoFundMe that you can use. It is actually connected to a project that I'm doing. I'm trying to write a book. It's a long-term project, but if you are curious to learn what is it about, please click on the link that is going to be in the description or scan the QR code that is going to be on screen to learn more. For those who can support the channel financially, which is perfectly fine, do it only if you can. Please just subscribe, like, hit the bell. That helps immensely with the algorithm. So this is it. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time, maybe with a different subject.